My name is Marcellus Greenwood, and I'm a 52-year-old genomic researcher from Helensburgh, Scotland. Before everything changed, I was living what I thought was my best life. I had a successful career at the University of Aberdeen, where I led groundbreaking research in genetic engineering. My partner Damien and I shared a beautiful Edwardian house overlooking Loch Lomond, and we had plans to get married in the summer. I wasn't religious. In fact, as a scientist, I prided myself on being rational and evidence-based. The few times I encountered religious people, I dismissed their beliefs as primitive superstitions. My parents had been nominal Christians who attended church on Christmas and Easter, but I'd abandoned even that minimal observance when I left for college. The day everything changed started normally enough. I was preparing for a major presentation about my latest research on CRISPR gene editing. The previous night, I'd stayed late at the lab, making sure everything was perfect for the upcoming conference in London. That morning, I noticed an unusual smell in the lab. Something acidic, chemical. I should have paid more attention, but I was too focused on my work. The ventilation system had been acting up for weeks, but maintenance kept postponing repairs. As I worked with some volatile compounds, I started feeling lightheaded. The room began to spin, but I attributed it to lack of sleep and too much coffee. That was my first mistake. The second was not immediately evacuating when I noticed the strange smell getting stronger. I remember checking my phone. Damien had sent a text about dinner plans. I started typing a response, but my fingers felt numb. The screen blurred. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. I tried to reach the emergency shower, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The room tilted sideways, and I crashed into a shelf of chemicals. Glass shattered. The last thing I remember was the burning sensation as various compounds mixed and reacted on my skin, creating toxic fumes that filled my lungs. The pain was excruciating. I could feel the chemicals burning through my lab coat, my skin blistering underneath. My throat closed up as the toxic fumes invaded my respiratory system. Through my blurring vision, I saw the emergency lights flashing, but the alarm seemed distant, muffled. I thought about Damien, about how we'd planned to visit Berlin next month, about the ring hidden in my desk drawer at home. I'd been planning to propose during that trip. Now, lying on the cold laboratory floor, those plans seemed like distant dreams. My colleagues found me minutes later, though it felt like hours. Dr. Sarah Chen, my research assistant, was the first to reach me. I could barely make out her face through my swollen eyes, but I heard her calling for help. The hazmat team arrived, followed by paramedics. They worked quickly, efficiently, but I was already slipping away. The ride to the University Medical Center was a blur of sirens and voices. I caught fragments of medical jargon: severe chemical burns, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest imminent. Someone was cutting away my clothes. Another person was inserting an IV. The pain began to fade, replaced by an odd numbness. Damien arrived at the hospital just as they were rushing me into emergency surgery. I heard his voice, breaking with emotion, but I couldn't respond. The doctors later told me I had third-degree chemical burns over 40% of my body. The toxic fumes had severely damaged my lungs, and my heart had stopped twice in the ambulance. Looking back now, I realize how arrogant I'd been. All my life, I'd believed in the supremacy of science. I'd scoffed at the idea of anything beyond what could be measured in a laboratory or proven through peer-reviewed research. My work in genetics had convinced me that we were nothing more than complex arrangements of molecules, that consciousness, love, even the soul were just products of biochemical reactions. I'd built my career on challenging traditional beliefs. My research papers often argued against intelligent design, presenting evidence for random evolution. I'd given lectures where I'd mockingly dismissed near-death experiences as hallucinations caused by dying brain cells. How ironic that I was about to experience one myself. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the beeping of medical monitors growing slower and slower. A doctor was shouting something about my blood pressure dropping. A nurse was preparing the defibrillator. Damien was being ushered out of the room, tears streaming down his face. Then my heart stopped. The monitors flatlined, and that's when my real journey began. The moment my heart stopped, everything changed. It wasn't like falling asleep or losing consciousness. It was more like awakening from a lifelong dream. The pain vanished instantly, and I felt myself floating above my body. The scene below looked like something from a medical drama. Doctors frantically working over my lifeless form, the rhythmic compression of chest compressions, the harsh buzz of the defibrillator. But I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My consciousness expanded beyond the confines of the hospital room, beyond the limitations of my physical form. All the scientific theories I'd clung to suddenly seemed inadequate to explain what I was experiencing. Then came the tunnel. Not the cliché bright light at the end of a dark passage that I'd dismissed in countless NDE accounts. This was different, more real than reality itself. The tunnel seemed to be made of living light, pulsating with colors I'd never seen before, colors that don't exist in our physical spectrum. As I moved through this tunnel, my entire life played before me, but not like a movie. I experienced every moment simultaneously, feeling not just my own emotions, but the impact my actions had on others. I saw how my prideful dismissal of faith had influenced students who looked up to me. I felt the pain I'd caused my parents when I mockingly rejected their beliefs. Every scientific paper I'd written denying the existence of God, every sarcastic comment about religion, every time I'd led others away from faith. It all weighed heavily on my soul. But what struck me most was seeing how my lifestyle choices had influenced younger people who saw me as a role model, leading them to embrace choices that went against God's design. The life review wasn't judgmental. It simply showed truth in its purest form. I saw how my pursuit of worldly knowledge had blinded me to spiritual truth. My scientific achievements, which I'd been so proud of, seemed insignificant compared to the eternal matters I'd ignored. Then I felt a presence, vast, loving, but also terrifyingly holy. I knew instantly it was Jesus Christ, not as a historical figure or religious symbol, but as the living God. His presence was overwhelming, filled with a love I'd never imagined possible, but also with a truth that stripped away all my pretenses. Marcellus, he spoke, not with words but directly to my soul. You sought truth through science, but you missed the greatest truth of all. His presence was both comforting and terrifying. The love radiating from him was beyond anything I'd ever experienced, but there was also an undeniable authority that made my scientific credentials seem meaningless. Every theory I'd developed about the origin of life, every paper I'd written dismissing intelligent design, they all crumbled in the face of absolute truth. My child, he continued, you studied the complexity of DNA but failed to see the signature of your creator. You mapped genomes but missed the divine blueprint. You taught others that life was a cosmic accident while I knit each person together in their mother's womb. I wanted to defend myself, to cite my peer-reviewed research, but in his presence, such arguments seemed absurd. How could I have been so blind? The precision of molecular machinery, the intricate dance of cellular processes, everything I'd attributed to random chance suddenly revealed itself as divine engineering. Then Jesus showed me something that shook me to my core. He revealed souls in torment, people who had rejected him, who had chosen to live by their own truth rather than God's. Among them were scientists, professors, and researchers I'd known and respected. Their intellectual achievements meant nothing now. They had led others away from God, and their suffering was intense. This is not what I desire for any soul, Jesus said, his voice filled with sorrow. I died to save humanity, but each person must choose to accept this gift. Your influence has led many to reject me. He then showed me how my open embrace of the gay lifestyle had influenced young people, leading them away from God's design for human sexuality. I saw students who, inspired by my example, had chosen paths that separated them from God's plan. The weight of this responsibility was crushing. But I love you, Marcellus, Jesus continued. Even in your rejection of me, I never stopped loving you. It's not too late to choose differently. He showed me glimpses of heaven, not the boring, cloud-filled realm I'd once mocked, but a place of incredible activity, learning, and discovery. I saw scientists there exploring the universe's mysteries with full understanding of God's role as creator. Their research was pure joy, unmarred by pride or competition. In my Father's house are many mansions, Jesus explained. There is a place for those who seek truth, but true science never contradicts divine truth. It reveals my glory. The revelation continued as Jesus showed me how my scientific work, though technically brilliant, had served to lead people away from eternal truth. Every lecture where I'd confidently declared that science disproved God's existence, every paper where I'd ridiculed religious beliefs, these weren't just academic exercises, they had eternal consequences. "Look," he said, and I saw a young student who had abandoned his faith after taking my classes. I watched as this student, convinced by my arguments, went on to influence others, creating a chain reaction of souls turning away from God. The responsibility was overwhelming. Then Jesus showed me something that particularly struck my heart: the true nature of love. What I had thought was love in my relationship with Damien was a distortion of God's design. He showed me how genuine love always aligns with His will and His created order. "I created marriage as a sacred union between man and woman," he explained. "It reflects my relationship with my church. Any deviation from this pattern leads souls away from me." I saw how my public advocacy for gay relationships had influenced countless young people to embrace a lifestyle that separated them from God's plan. This wasn't about hate or discrimination. It was about eternal truth and God's perfect design for human relationships. "Your influence extends beyond your scientific work," Jesus continued. "You've encouraged others to reject my design for human sexuality and relationships. This has caused many to stumble." The truth was clear and undeniable. All my arguments about genetic predisposition and natural variation seemed hollow in the face of divine truth. I realized that true freedom and love could only be found within God's established boundaries. Jesus then showed me various religious paths I had encountered in my life. I saw clearly how all paths that denied His deity and unique salvation led to destruction. The interfaith dialogue I'd once praised as progressive now revealed itself as a dangerous compromise with eternal truth. "I am the way, the truth, and the life," he declared. "No one comes to the Father except through me." This isn't narrow-mindedness, it's reality. He showed me how other religions, despite their moral teachings or philosophical insights, ultimately led people away from salvation. I saw Muhammad, who I'd once respected as a historical figure, revealed as someone who had led countless souls astray. The various Eastern philosophies I dabbled in during college were exposed as deceptions that obscured the singular truth of Christ. "Many will claim to know the way," Jesus explained, "but salvation comes only through my sacrifice on the cross. The path is narrow and few find it." The reality of hell was far worse than any religious text had described. I saw souls in eternal torment, not just suffering physical pain, but experiencing the ultimate horror of complete separation from God. These weren't just abstract concepts anymore. They were real people who had made wrong choices in life. "This is why I came," Jesus said, his voice filled with both authority and compassion. "This is why I died. Every soul is precious to me, but they must choose to accept my sacrifice, follow my ways, and live according to my truth." Then he showed me something that brought me to my knees, though I no longer had physical knees. He revealed how my scientific work, if redirected to glorify God, could have led people to faith rather than away from it. I saw an alternative timeline where my research pointed to intelligent design, where my discoveries led students to marvel at God's creation rather than doubt His existence. "Science was meant to reveal my glory," he explained. "The complexity you study in genetics, the precision you observe in molecular biology, these are my fingerprints in creation. True science always points to me." The love radiating from Jesus was overwhelming, but it wasn't the permissive, anything-goes kind of love I'd once advocated for. This was perfect love, holy, pure, and aligned with absolute truth. It was love that desired the best for each soul, even when that meant confronting uncomfortable truths. "You have a choice now, Marcellus," Jesus said. "You can return and use your gifts to lead people to me, or you can continue on your current path. But remember what you've seen here. Remember the eternal consequences of your choices." I understood then that my entire worldview had been built on sand. The academic accolades, peer recognition, and scientific breakthroughs I'd achieved meant nothing compared to the eternal truths before me. Every soul was eternal. and what we did with the truth of Jesus Christ determined our eternal destiny. Your scientific mind was a gift from me, Jesus continued. But like all gifts, it was meant to be used for my glory, not to lead others away from truth. He showed me scenes from the early church, the apostles who had died defending the truth of his resurrection. These weren't myths or legends as I'd once dismissed them. They were historical realities. I saw how the true church had preserved his teachings through the centuries, despite persecution and challenges. The faith once delivered to the saints remains unchanged, he explained. Modern attempts to redefine my teachings, especially regarding marriage and human sexuality, are deviations from eternal truth. Then Jesus showed me something that shattered my intellectual pride completely. He revealed how many of my groundbreaking scientific discoveries had actually been subtle revelations of truths already written in his word. The genetic codes I'd studied were his language of creation. The molecular machines I'd investigated were his divine engineering. Science without me is like studying a painting while denying the artist exists, he said. You've been analyzing my brushstrokes while refusing to acknowledge the painter. The weight of eternal reality pressed upon my consciousness. I saw how brief our earthly lives were compared to eternity. All the arguments I'd made about living for the present moment seemed foolish when faced with the reality of eternal existence. Your life is not your own, Jesus declared. You were bought with a price. Your body is meant to be a temple of my Holy Spirit, not a vessel for sin. He then showed me how the sacraments, baptism, communion, and other holy mysteries weren't just symbolic rituals as I'd once thought, but actual channels of divine grace. I saw how these sacred acts connected the physical world with spiritual reality in ways my scientific mind had never grasped. These are not mere traditions, Jesus explained. They are means of grace I established for my church. Through them, my people participate in divine life. The revelation continued as he showed me how my rejection of traditional Christian sexual ethics hadn't been the enlightened position I'd thought. Instead, it had been a capitulation to modern cultural pressures, a departure from the divine design that had eternal consequences. I created humanity male and female, he said, and this design reflects deep spiritual truths. The modern world's attempt to blur these distinctions grieves my heart and harms those made in my image. Then came the most profound part of the revelation. Jesus showed me how my scientific research, properly understood, could actually support and demonstrate God's truth rather than undermine it. The complexity of DNA, the irreducible complexity of cellular mechanisms, the fine-tuning of physical constants, all pointed to intelligent design. Your work could have revealed my glory, he said. Instead, you used it to support theories that led people away from me. But it's not too late to change course. The love in his presence remained constant, but there was also an unmistakable sadness as he showed me souls who had been influenced by my teaching and example. Young researchers who had followed my path of skepticism, students who had abandoned their faith after taking my classes, colleagues who had been strengthened in their atheism by my arguments. Each soul is precious to me, Jesus said. I died for each one. When you lead them away from truth, you work against my purpose of salvation. He then revealed something that particularly struck my scientific mind, the true nature of consciousness and the soul. All my materialistic explanations for human consciousness suddenly seemed inadequate. I saw how the soul was distinct from the brain, how consciousness transcended physical processes. You studied the brain but missed the soul, he said. You mapped neural pathways but overlooked the spiritual dimension of human existence. The revelation continued as Jesus showed me how the theory of evolution, which I'd championed so vigorously, had been used to undermine faith in divine creation. While he showed me that he had established natural laws and processes, the random, purposeless evolution I'd taught was a distortion of truth. I am the creator, he declared. Whether through immediate action or guided processes, all life comes from me. There is purpose and design in creation. Then came a sobering vision of judgment. I saw souls standing before God's throne, giving account for their lives. Scientists, professors, and intellectuals who had led others astray faced particularly stern judgment. Their influence had created ripple effects through generations. To whom much is given, much is required, Jesus explained. Your intellectual gifts carried great responsibility. He showed me how the pursuit of scientific truth, when properly aligned with divine truth, could lead to genuine discovery and innovation. I saw Christian scientists through history who had made groundbreaking discoveries while maintaining their faith: Newton, Pascal, Mendel, and others. These understood that all truth is my truth, he said. They saw no conflict between faith and science because they recognized me as the author of both. The vision expanded to show me how modern science, divorced from divine truth, had become a kind of religion itself with its own dogmas and orthodoxies. I saw how I had been a high priest of this secular faith, converting others to a worldview that excluded God. Your lectures became sermons for atheism, Jesus said. Your research papers became scriptures for materialism. You thought you were liberating minds, but you were enslaving souls to deception. He then showed me something that deeply humbled me: the prayers of faithful Christians for my salvation. I saw my parents, despite my mockery of their faith, praying for me daily. I saw Christian colleagues who, though I'd ridiculed their beliefs, had never stopped interceding for my soul. Their prayers have been heard, Jesus said. This moment is partly an answer to their faithful intercession. The vision shifted to show me the true nature of spiritual warfare. I saw how my scientific work had been used by dark forces to undermine faith. The spiritual realm, which I dismissed as primitive superstition, was absolutely real and actively involved in human affairs. There is more to reality than what your instruments can measure, he explained. The battle for souls is real, and you've been fighting on the wrong side. Jesus then revealed how my promotion of LGBTQ+ ideology had contributed to spiritual confusion among young people. What I'd seen as advocacy for human rights had actually been cooperation with forces working against God's design. True love speaks truth, he said. True compassion doesn't affirm people in paths that lead to destruction. I saw how genuine Christianity wasn't about hate or bigotry, as I'd often claimed, but about aligning with divine truth out of love for God and concern for souls. The biblical standards I'd dismissed as outdated were actually eternal principles designed for human flourishing. My commands are not burdensome, Jesus explained. They are protective boundaries set by a loving Father. The vision continued as Jesus showed me how my influence had extended far beyond my immediate circle. My research papers, cited in hundreds of publications, had contributed to a worldview that denied God's existence. My public statements supporting various lifestyle choices had been shared on social media, influencing thousands. Every word, every action creates ripples in eternity, he said. Nothing is truly private or without consequence. Then he revealed something that particularly shook me: the reality of spiritual deception. I saw how many of the progressive Christian voices I'd admired, who tried to reconcile biblical truth with modern cultural trends, were actually leading people astray. My word doesn't change to fit human preferences, Jesus declared. Those who twist Scripture to match cultural trends are false teachers. He showed me how true Christianity had always been countercultural, standing firm against prevailing winds of doctrine. The early Christians faced death rather than compromise truth. Modern believers who stood firm despite ridicule were following in their footsteps. The cost of discipleship remains high, he explained, but the rewards are eternal. The vision expanded to show me the interconnected nature of truth. Scientific truth, moral truth, and spiritual truth were not separate categories as I'd believed, but different aspects of God's unified truth. When properly understood, they never contradicted each other. Your compartmentalized thinking led to spiritual blindness, Jesus said. Truth cannot be divided against itself. He then showed me how my research into genetic engineering, while technically impressive, had often crossed ethical boundaries. The manipulation of human genetic code raised serious moral questions that couldn't be answered by science alone. Life is sacred, he declared. Your work should have respected the boundaries I established. The revelation deepened as Jesus showed me how my advocacy for genetic modification and transhumanism had contributed to a mindset that saw humans as merely biological machines to be upgraded rather than sacred beings made in God's image. I designed humanity with purpose, he said. Attempts to improve My design often reflects human pride rather than wisdom. Then came a profound insight into the nature of gender. Jesus showed me how the male-female distinction wasn't just biological, but reflected deep spiritual truths about his relationship with the church. The modern attempt to blur or deny these distinctions was a direct attack on his created order. This isn't about cultural norms, he explained. It's about eternal design patterns woven into creation itself. He revealed how my public support for gender ideology had confused young people struggling with identity issues. What I'd seen as compassionate affirmation had actually prevented many from finding their true identity in Christ. True identity is found in me, Jesus said, not in fluid categories created by human wisdom. The vision shifted to show me the reality of spiritual authority. I saw how my rejection of biblical authority had left me vulnerable to deception. My trust in peer review and academic consensus had replaced submission to divine truth. Human knowledge changes constantly, he said. My word endures forever. Jesus then showed me something that particularly convicted me, how my relationship with Damien, which I defended as love, had actually been a substitute for the deeper spiritual intimacy I was meant to have with God. I created sexual intimacy for a specific context, he explained. Outside that context, it becomes a counterfeit of true spiritual union. The love Jesus showed me was overwhelming, but it wasn't the permissive, affirming kind of love I'd preached. This was perfect love that desired ultimate good, even when that meant confronting sin and calling for repentance. True love doesn't affirm harmful choices, he said. It calls people to truth and transformation. He showed me how the modern church's attempt to be inclusive by compromising biblical truth was actually a form of cruel deception. Real inclusion meant inviting people to repentance and transformation, not affirming them in destructive patterns. My church must speak truth in love, Jesus declared. Silence about sin is not love, it's indifference to eternal consequences. Then came a startling revelation about the nature of time and eternity. Jesus showed me how our brief earthly lives determined eternal destinies. All the arguments I'd made about living authentically seemed foolish when viewed against the backdrop of forever. 70 or 80 years versus eternity, he said. Yet humans trade eternal joy for temporary pleasure. The vision expanded to show me the true nature of the spiritual battle raging on earth. I saw how my scientific work, divorced from divine truth, had served forces opposing God's kingdom. Every paper, every lecture that denied divine creation had been a weapon in this spiritual war. You thought you were fighting superstition, Jesus said, but you were fighting against truth itself. He revealed how the academic world I'd revered had become a stronghold of anti-Christian thought. The peer review process I'd trusted often served to enforce materialistic orthodoxy rather than pursue truth. Many of your colleagues are also trapped in this deception, he explained. They need someone to show them the way out. The vision then shifted to show me the eternal impact of sexual sin. I saw how the normalization of various sexual behaviors had created spiritual bondage for countless people. What the world celebrated as freedom was actually enslavement. Sexual sin affects the soul deeply, Jesus explained. It creates bonds that can only be broken through my power. He showed me how my public defense of alternative lifestyles had given false hope to people struggling with unwanted attractions. Instead of pointing them to the freedom and transformation available in Christ, I'd encouraged them to embrace identities that kept them from God's best. Many wanted to change, he said. Your words convinced them change was impossible and unnecessary. Then Jesus revealed something that struck at the core of my scientific pride. How many of my research conclusions had been subtly influenced by my spiritual blindness? My rejection of God had led me to interpret data in ways that supported my atheistic worldview. True science, pursued honestly, always points to me, he declared. Your bias prevented you from seeing what was clearly there. The revelation continued as he showed me the true purpose of human sexuality. The physical union of husband and wife was designed to reflect deeper spiritual truths about Christ and his church. Any deviation from this pattern distorted these sacred truths. Marriage isn't just a social construct, Jesus explained. It's a living parable of my relationship with my people. He then showed me how the enemy had strategically attacked this truth through various movements and ideologies. What appeared as progress was actually a coordinated assault on God's design. The battle isn't against people, he said. It's against powers and principalities that seek to destroy my image in humanity. The vision deepened as Jesus showed me how my research in genetic engineering had sometimes crossed ethical boundaries that he had established. Though my intentions were to advance medical science, I had often ignored moral considerations in pursuit of scientific progress. Life is sacred from conception, he said. Your work with embryonic cells violated this sanctity. Then he revealed something that particularly humbled me, how my academic influence had created a legacy of unbelief. Students who had taken my classes had gone on to become professors themselves, spreading materialistic philosophies to new generations. The impact of a teacher extends through time, Jesus explained. Your words have influenced more souls than you know. He showed me scenes from my lectures where I had mockingly dismissed intelligent design and creationism. I saw the faces of Christian students who had struggled with their faith after hearing my arguments. Some had abandoned their beliefs entirely. They trusted you as an authority, he said, but you led them away from the highest truth. The vision shifted to show me the reality of spiritual warfare in academia. I saw how forces of darkness had strategically positioned influential professors like myself to shape young minds away from faith. Universities were originally created to glorify me, Jesus said. Now many have become strongholds of opposition to my truth. He revealed how my public statements supporting various progressive causes had been used to undermine traditional Christian values. My scientific credentials had given weight to arguments that led people away from biblical truth. Your voice carried authority, he explained, but you used that authority to oppose my word. The vision then revealed something that deeply convicted me: the eternal consequences of intellectual pride. I saw how my academic achievements had become a form of idolatry, replacing worship of God with worship of human reason. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up, Jesus said. Your intelligence was meant to serve truth, not replace it. He showed me how the scientific community's rejection of divine truth had led to a kind of intellectual darkness, despite all our technological advances. We had gained knowledge but lost wisdom. Modern science asks, can we, but rarely should we, he explained. Without moral anchors, knowledge becomes dangerous. Then Jesus revealed the true nature of the culture war I had been part of. What I had seen as progress toward enlightenment was actually a coordinated spiritual assault on God's truth. The battle isn't primarily political or cultural, he said. It's spiritual, and eternal souls hang in the balance. I saw how my public advocacy for progressive causes had contributed to weakening societal foundations that God had established for human flourishing. My influence had helped normalize behaviors that led people away from him. Society's moral collapse didn't happen by accident, Jesus explained. It came through the deliberate efforts of influential voices like yours. The vision expanded to show me how the enemy had used academia to attack truth systematically, first by questioning biblical authority, then by promoting moral relativism, and finally by celebrating sin as virtue. Each generation moved further from truth, he said, until good became evil and evil became good. Jesus then showed me something that shattered my scientific materialism completely: the reality of demonic influence in human affairs. I saw how spiritual forces had worked through academic institutions, media, and cultural movements to promote agendas that opposed God's truth. The battle isn't against flesh and blood, he said. Your real enemies were never the religious people you debated. He revealed how my research, though technically accurate, had often been interpreted through a lens that deliberately excluded divine agency. What I had attributed to random chance was actually evidence of intelligent design. You saw my fingerprints everywhere, Jesus explained, but refused to acknowledge the hand that left them. Then came a profound revelation about the nature of truth itself. I saw how all truth, scientific, moral, spiritual, originated in God. My attempt to separate these categories had led to distorted understanding. Truth is not departmentalized, he declared. All genuine discoveries point to me, their source. The vision shifted to show me how my influence had affected the next generation of scientists. Young researchers, inspired by my example, had embraced a worldview that left no room for God. They followed your path, Jesus said, not realizing it led away from ultimate truth. He showed me how my public stance on social issues had contributed to a cultural shift that made it harder for people to find their way to God. What I had seen as fighting for rights had actually been fighting against divine design. You thought you were liberating people, he explained, but you were helping to construct spiritual prisons. The revelation continued as Jesus showed me how my research into human genetics, while technically sophisticated, had often been used to support arguments against his created order. You studied the complexity of life, he said, but used that knowledge to deny the Creator. Then he revealed something that particularly struck my scientific mind: the true nature of consciousness and the human soul. All my materialistic explanations suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. The soul isn't an emergent property of brain function, Jesus explained. It's a divine gift that transcends physical reality. He showed me how my public advocacy for scientific materialism had created a ripple effect of unbelief. Colleagues, students, and readers of my papers had used my arguments to justify their own rejection of faith. Your words carried weight in academic circles, he said, but they led people away from eternal truth. The vision expanded to show me the true purpose of scientific inquiry. Rather than disproving God's existence, genuine science was meant to reveal his glory and wisdom. Every discovery should have led to worship, Jesus declared. Instead, you used them to promote doubt. He then showed me something that deeply humbled me: how many of my groundbreaking discoveries had actually been subtle revelations of truths already written in his word. You thought you were pioneering new territory, he said, but you were simply uncovering what I had already designed. As the revelations continued, Jesus showed me a series of choices that lay before me. Each choice came with clear eternal consequences, not just for me but for countless others who would be influenced by my decisions. If you return, he said, you must choose between continuing your current path or using your gifts to serve my truth. He showed me two possible futures. In one, I continued my research and advocacy as before, leading more souls away from God. In the other, I used my scientific knowledge and academic position to point people toward divine truth. The cost will be high, Jesus warned. Many in academia will reject you. Some will call you a traitor to science. I saw scenes of potential future lectures where, instead of promoting materialistic evolution, I presented evidence for intelligent design. I saw myself writing papers that acknowledged divine agency in creation. Your credentials won't be revoked, he explained, but your reputation in secular academia will suffer. Then he showed me something more personal and challenging: my relationship with Damien. If I chose to follow Christ fully, I would need to end this relationship and embrace God's design for sexuality and marriage. This will be your hardest test, Jesus said, but you cannot serve two masters. I saw the pain this would cause, not just to Damien and me, but to our friends and supporters in the LGBTQ+ community. Many would see it as betrayal, as internalized homophobia, as giving in to religious bigotry. Remember, Jesus said, temporary pain is better than eternal regret. He then showed me the ripple effects of both choices. If I chose to continue my current path, my influence would lead more young scientists away from faith, contributing to a growing culture of atheistic materialism in academia. Your words carry authority, Jesus explained. They can either build my kingdom or work against it. But if I chose to follow him fully, my testimony would have powerful impact. As a former gay scientist who had encountered the living Christ, my story would challenge both scientific materialism and progressive ideology. Many are secretly questioning their choices, he said. They need someone with your background to show them the way home. The vision expanded to show me specific individuals who would be impacted by my choice. Students struggling with their faith in science classes, researchers questioning materialistic explanations, people wrestling with unwanted same-sex attractions. These souls are waiting for truth spoken in love, Jesus explained. Your experience uniquely positions you to reach them. He showed me how my scientific training, rather than being discarded, could be redirected to demonstrate God's glory. The same analytical skills I'd used to promote evolution could be used to reveal evidence of design. Science itself isn't the enemy, he said. It's the materialistic philosophy that has hijacked it. Then Jesus revealed something profound about the nature of sacrifice. What seemed like losing everything, career reputation, relationship, community standing, was actually gaining something far greater. Those who lose their life for my sake will find it, he declared. True fulfillment comes through surrender to me. I saw future scenes of speaking at conferences, not just about science, but about the intersection of faith, sexuality, and scientific truth. My unique background would open doors that were closed to others. You'll face opposition, Jesus warned, but your testimony will set many free. The vision deepened as Jesus showed me how my expertise in molecular biology could be used to demonstrate the impossibility of random evolution producing the complex systems I'd studied. The machinery of life bears my signature, he said. You've been studying my technology without acknowledging the technologist. He revealed how many of my colleagues secretly harbored doubts about purely materialistic explanations, but feared professional ostracism if they expressed them. The academic world has become hostile to my truth, Jesus explained, but cracks are appearing in the materialistic facade. Then he showed me something that struck deep, how my relationship with Damien, though emotionally significant, had actually prevented me from experiencing the deeper spiritual intimacy I was designed for. Human relationships can become idols, he said. They can substitute for the divine relationship I offer. The vision expanded to show me the true nature of identity. What I had thought was my authentic self, my sexual orientation, my scientific materialism, was actually a false identity that kept me from my true purpose. Identity is found in me, Jesus declared. Not in sexuality, not in career, not in human achievement. He showed me future scenes of ministry, not just in academia, but in churches and support groups. My testimony would bridge the gap between faith communities and those struggling with sexual identity. Many feel trapped between two worlds, he explained. Your story will show them the path to freedom. Jesus then revealed how my scientific reputation, though it would suffer initially, could ultimately serve a greater purpose. My academic credentials would give weight to my testimony about both intelligent design and sexual transformation. Your credibility wasn't given to you to promote unbelief, he said. It was to prepare you for this moment of truth. I saw myself speaking at universities, presenting evidence for design in nature. I saw students' eyes opening as they realized science didn't require rejecting God. Many are seeking permission to believe, Jesus explained. Your background gives you authority to grant that permission. He then showed me the ripple effects of various scientific papers I could write. Papers that would demonstrate how the latest discoveries in genetics and molecular biology actually support biblical creation. The evidence has always pointed to me, he said. It just needs honest interpreters. The revelation shifted to show me the spiritual warfare occurring in peer review processes and grant committees. I saw how materialistic philosophy, not scientific evidence, often determined what got published. The system seems overwhelming, Jesus acknowledged, but I am greater than the system. He revealed how my experience with same-sex attraction would help me speak truth with compassion. Unlike some Christians who had never faced these struggles, I would understand the deep emotional challenges involved. Your weakness becomes strength in my hands, he explained. Your struggle becomes a bridge to reach others. The vision continued as Jesus showed me how my future testimony would impact different groups: secular scientists who secretly questioned evolution, Christians struggling with same-sex attraction, students torn between faith and science. Each group needs what you'll offer, he said. Scientific credibility combined with personal experience and spiritual truth. He showed me how my research lab could become a place where young scientists learned to pursue truth without compromising faith. Instead of pressuring Christian students to adopt materialistic views, I could show them how to integrate faith and science. Science and faith aren't enemies, Jesus explained. They're both paths to truth when properly understood. Then he showed me something particularly powerful. how my public repentance and transformation would affect the LGBTQ+ community. While many would initially react with anger, some would be deeply moved. Many in that community are secretly unhappy, he said. They're waiting for permission to question their choices. The vision expanded to show me writing books that combine scientific expertise with personal testimony. These works would reach people that neither pure science books nor traditional Christian books could touch. Your unique journey creates unique opportunities, Jesus explained. Few can speak to both worlds as you will. He showed me how my experience would help me address the complex intersection of genetics and sexuality. I could speak about biological factors without using them to justify choices that contradicted his design. Science describes, it doesn't prescribe, he said. You'll help people understand this crucial difference. Jesus then revealed how my understanding of genetics could help address common misconceptions about sexual orientation and biological determinism. Having a predisposition doesn't mandate behavior, he explained. My grace offers freedom from all bondage. The vision showed me counseling young scientists who faced similar struggles, torn between their same-sex attractions and their growing awareness of divine truth. They need someone who understands both worlds, Jesus said, someone who's walked this path before them. He revealed how my transformation would challenge the popular narrative that change is impossible or harmful. My testimony would offer hope without minimizing the difficulty of the journey. The world says born this way means stay this way, he explained. You'll show them that new birth in me brings real change. Then Jesus showed me specific conferences and seminars where my testimony would have maximum impact. Scientific gatherings, Christian universities, and professional associations. Your story will reach places traditional ministry cannot, he said. Your credentials will open doors, your testimony will walk through. The vision expanded to show me the eternal consequences of my choice. I saw souls who would find their way to truth through my changed life and redirected work. This isn't just about you, Jesus emphasized. It's about all the lives you'll influence for eternity. He then showed me how my expertise in genetic engineering could be redirected to explore the ethical implications of manipulating God's design. Technology without moral boundaries becomes destructive. Jesus said, "You'll help others see these crucial limits." The vision revealed how my research could demonstrate the incredible complexity of biological systems, pointing to intelligent design rather than random processes. Each discovery should lead to worship, he explained. You'll help others see the designer behind the design. Jesus then showed me specific individuals who would be impacted by my testimony. A brilliant young researcher struggling with faith, a gay student secretly questioning his lifestyle, a Christian scientist afraid to challenge evolutionary orthodoxy. They're waiting for someone like you, he said, someone who understands their struggles and can show them the way out. The revelation expanded to show me the spiritual battle raging in academia. I saw how materialistic philosophy had become a kind of religion, with its own dogmas and persecution of dissenters. The academic world needs brave voices, Jesus declared, those willing to risk reputation for truth. He showed me how my published papers could be rewritten from a new perspective, not denying the scientific data, but interpreting it through the lens of divine creation. The evidence hasn't changed, he explained, only the framework for understanding it. As the final phase of my near-death experience began, Jesus prepared me for what would happen if I chose to return. The path won't be easy, he warned, but my grace will be sufficient. He showed me the immediate challenges I would face. The first thing I remember after returning was the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room. The beeping of monitors slowly came into focus, and I heard Damien's voice, thick with emotion, saying, "He's back." The physical pain was intense. My chemical burns and damaged lungs made every breath an effort. But the spiritual clarity I'd received during my experience burned even stronger. I knew what I had to do, though I also knew it would cost me everything I'd built my life around. Recovery took months. During that time, I began the difficult process of transformation. I first told Damien about my experience. He reacted as I expected, with a mixture of concern and skepticism, suggesting that my vision was just the result of oxygen deprivation and trauma. When I explained that I could no longer continue our relationship, his hurt and anger were devastating. But I knew I had to stay true to what I'd been shown. My return to academia proved equally challenging. I withdrew several papers that were pending publication. Works that I now knew promoted a purely materialistic worldview that contradicted the truth. My colleagues were baffled by my changed perspective. Many assumed the accident had affected my mental faculties. But gradually, something unexpected began happening. Students started coming to my office privately, admitting their own doubts about materialistic evolution. Other researchers confided their suspicions that intelligent design better explained the complexity we observed in molecular systems. My testimony began opening doors I never expected. Today, 5 years later, I still hold my position at the university, though in a modified role. My research now focuses on demonstrating the remarkable engineering evident in biological systems. I've published new papers that, while rigorously scientific, don't shy away from discussing evidence of design in nature. My personal journey has also led me to establish a support group for scientists and academics struggling with issues of faith, sexuality, and identity. The very credentials that once gave me authority to lead people away from God now lend weight to my testimony about his transforming power. The cost has been high, just as Jesus warned. I lost friends, professional opportunities, and my former place in the LGBTQ+ community. But I've gained something far greater: the peace that comes from living in truth and the joy of seeing others find their way to faith through my story. I still study the mysteries of molecular biology, but now I see them through different eyes. Each discovery reveals more of the divine engineering I once attributed to blind chance. The same evidence I once used to argue against God's existence now fills me with awe at his wisdom and creative power. My near-death experience changed everything, not just my beliefs, but my entire understanding of reality. Science hasn't lost its appeal. If anything, it's become more fascinating as I've learned to see the Creator's hand in every elegant mechanism and complex system I study. To those who knew me before, my transformation seems like academic suicide, a tragic descent into religious delusion. But I know better. I've seen the truth, and no amount of professional prestige or personal comfort is worth denying it. The journey continues. Each day brings new challenges and opportunities to share what I've learned about the harmony between genuine science and divine truth. My life's work has changed from promoting materialistic evolution to demonstrating how the latest discoveries in molecular biology point to intelligent design. I still face opposition, but I'm no longer afraid. I've seen what lies beyond this life, and I know that temporary professional rejection is nothing compared to eternal truth. My prayer is that my story will help others bridge the artificial divide between faith and science, finding their way to the one who designed it all. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to receive more transformative stories that challenge our understanding of science, faith, and truth. Your support helps these important messages reach others who need to hear them.